This video is sponsored by Ground News. Millions of Swiss citizens will cast their vote on a simple yes or no question. Should Switzerland put a limit on its own population growth? Now, if they do, this will have serious consequences to both Switzerland and the EU. It could literally mean the end of free trade between the both of them. And maybe even the end of Schengen too. But more on that later in this video. This right over here is Switzerland, a landlocked non-EU country right in the heart of Europe, with a population of around 9 million people. And this is its current population trend. In a low growth scenario, Switzerland would reach about 9.3 million people by 2055. And in a high growth scenario, that number rises to a staggering 11.7 million people. In other words, Switzerland is likely to surpass 10 million people by around 2040. And according to the Swiss People's Party, the country's largest political party, a population beyond that point would place way too much pressure on infrastructure, healthcare, schools, the environment, and social services. That is why the People's Party launched an initiative called No to 10 Million, a push to cap Switzerland's population at 10 million people by 2050. And let's have a look at the actual Swiss population growth numbers. Because first, there's natural population growth. You know, births minus deaths. But this is relatively low. In 2025, this was only 6,200 people. And second, there's net migration. And last year, net migration added around 75,000 people to Switzerland, making immigration by far the main driver of population growth. And if we look at where these migrants are coming from, the largest groups originate from countries like Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Romania, Poland, and Greece. Others come from the rest of the European Union, wider Europe, and countries outside of the continent altogether. Now, the No to a Switzerland of 10 million initiative does not introduce hard immigration quotas. No, instead, it creates a very strict two-stage emergency mechanism written directly into the Swiss constitution. Stage 1 would begin the moment Switzerland's permanent resident population passes 9.5 million people. And at that point, the Swiss government has to try and reduce immigration pressure using three main levers. The first is asylum policy, with the initiative calling for stricter rules that will make it harder for asylum seekers to stay in Switzerland permanently. The second is family reunification, as the proposal would tighten the rules of migrants bringing relatives into the country. And the third targets international agreements, with the initiative proposing safeguard clauses, exemptions, or even renegotiations of treaties like free movement with the EU. But then comes stage 2, the nuclear option. If Switzerland's population still reaches 10 million before 2050, the government will be constitutionally required to take much stronger action. And that includes terminating international agreements that contribute to population growth. But most importantly, if Switzerland stays above the 10 million cap for 2 years, the government would be forced to end the free movement of persons agreement with the European Union. So, now for the most interesting question. What will the people of Switzerland actually vote for? At the moment, the polls are so close. Around 45% support the initiative, while 46% oppose it. Essentially, a statistical dead heat. But if we look at Ground News, which pulls together all the different news stories on a specific topic from different outlets across the world and then summarizes it, polls have changed. According to them, 52% of 20,000 respondents now oppose the initiative. And what makes this tool even better is this bias comparison feature, because when I click on that, I can see how different types of media outlets are reporting on the story. I mean, obviously, left-leaning coverage does not like the initiative and says that it puts a lot of strain on Switzerland's ties with neighbors and EU free movement, something we'll get into later in this video. And of course, the right-wing narrative is more positive. They are saying that currently there is a system collapse and that the initiative could do a lot of good for the country. And if we scroll down further, you can actually see all of the articles that are reporting on the story. And what makes it even better is that you can see their political leaning, you can see the factuality score, and you can also see who owns the outlet. And that is why I use Ground News pretty much every day. It cuts right through the bias and lets you compare different perspectives on the very same story, something that is so incredibly important in this partisan world today. You can now get 40% off unlimited access to the Vantage plan using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on the screen right now. But now let's get back into the video and let's take a closer look at the No to 10 Million initiative and whether it's actually a good idea. Supporters of the initiative, mainly the Swiss People's Party, argue that current immigration levels are simply not sustainable anymore. And according to them, that growth is starting to put too much unsustainable pressure on infrastructure. Things like housing, transport, schools, and even Switzerland's natural landscape. Supporters also insist that this initiative would not completely shut down immigration. They say Switzerland would still be able to attract skilled workers and around 40,000 migrants per year under the new system. Now, on the other side, both the Swiss Federal Council and the Parliament are officially recommending voting no on the initiative. And their argument is basically this. The economic consequences would be enormous, as Switzerland's companies are very much dependent on foreign workers. And let's not forget here, Switzerland has an aging population, and with only 1.29 births per woman, immigration is very, very important. But the really big issue here is Switzerland's relationship with the European Union. Right now, Swiss citizens and EU citizens have the right to freely live and work in each other's countries. If Switzerland ever decides to end this free movement agreement, a special rule called the Guillotine Clause will automatically kick in. Just like the name suggests, this clause would instantly chop down and cancel 6 other vital agreements between Switzerland and the EU. Switzerland would suddenly lose its special access to European trade, transportation, agriculture, and scientific research. And since the EU handles nearly 2/3 of all Swiss trade, losing these deals would be a massive blow to the Swiss economy and completely break Switzerland's relationship with its biggest neighbor. This is what I think, and I'll be very honest here. I think this referendum presents a genuinely super difficult choice for the Swiss people. And I do really sympathize with many of the concerns being raised here. 1 million additional people in just 12 years may not sound that dramatic at first. But proportionally, that will be the equivalent of Germany adding roughly 9 million people over the very same time period. And when you look at it that way, it becomes much easier to understand the pressure that many Swiss people feel on housing, transport, schools, and healthcare. But this brings me to my main issue with the initiative, though. Because while the diagnosis is super understandable, the proposed solutions simply aren't. Let's look at those numbers again. And very roughly speaking, this is where immigration into Switzerland comes from. And the 2 areas the initiative mainly wants to target are asylum and family reunification. Last year, around 25,000 asylum applications were processed in Switzerland. Of those, 7,400 applicants received refugee status, while another 5,000 received provisional admission because they could not be legally or safely deported. And when it comes to rejections and deportations, Switzerland has been somewhat successful here, deporting around 5,300 asylum seekers last year. Of course, returns could still be improved further, but Switzerland already performs relatively well here compared to many neighboring countries. The Swiss People's Party argues, though, that the number of people that are in Switzerland provisionally should also be reduced. But this becomes very difficult because international law prohibits countries from sending people back to places where they could face persecution, torture, or serious danger. So, realistically, there may not be much more that Switzerland can do here without fundamentally changing its international obligations. Then there's family reunification. Around 40,000 people moved to Switzerland in 2025 to join relatives already living there, with more than half coming from EU countries. Restricting this would once again mean breaking Switzerland's agreement on the free movement of people. And if you really do want to reduce immigration significantly, you eventually end up targeting workers. But again here, more than 90% come from the EU or EFTA. So introducing strict limits here would once again require breaking free movement agreements. But There are also workers from outside of the EU and EFTA. Around 6,600 permits were issued to third country nationals last year. But even if Switzerland stopped all of them, the impact would remain relatively limited. Fewer than 15,000 people annually would realistically be affected once family reunification is included. And interestingly, Switzerland actually already has a quota system in place here. 12,000 permits per year, yet this limit has not been reached in the last few years. So, ultimately, making a significant dent in immigration would really require Switzerland to start breaking major international agreements. And personally, I really do not believe that's in Switzerland's interest, especially in Switzerland's economic interest. So the Swiss People's Party should really present more concrete and realistic proposals, because for me, this initiative simply feels too risky. And I really believe Switzerland would be better off debating and implementing targeted migration policies now, rather than hard-coding such a drastic limit into the constitution, because that leaves very little flexibility. But do let me know what you think in the comments. And while Switzerland may be taking more distance from the EU, the UK, on the other hand, might actually be moving closer to us again. And if you want to know why, check out our video on that topic right over here. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to know how stories are being framed, check out our sponsor Ground News. You can get the Unlimited Access Vantage plan with 40% off by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. And as always, a special shout out to our presidents, who make all of this possible. Your support is awesome.